We have a great grand rounds today, and I was about to say that on behalf of Marcia Wills-Karp, who is, I believe, still in Europe at meetings, I want to welcome you on behalf of the Department of Environmental Health Sciences and on behalf of the Center for a Livable Future to the 15th annual Dodge Lectureship. And before I introduce this year's Dodge Lecturer, let me just give you a few words about the Dodge Lectureship. We were probably less than 3 years into our work as a center when one of our alums read on the website about what the Center for a Livable Future was trying to do. And Ed Dodge contacted our development office and said that he and his wife, in honor of his late wife Nancy, he wanted to devote a regular portion of the Dodge Family Foundation philanthropy to support the Center for a Livable Future. That endowment gift allows us annually to bring to the school a distinguished leader in food system work or environmental work. The 15th lecture, if you look in your brochure, you'll see that today's lecturer joins a very distinguished group of thought leaders in our field. So we will be webcasting. I believe we are already webcasting this event live and recording the lecture for posting on our website in subsequent weeks. The hashtag for this is CLF event, and it's been set up for those of you who are interested in tweeting about it and sharing your impressions of what you hear today. During the question and answer period at the end of the lecture, please wait for a microphone because your questions will also be recorded. And we hope that you'll want to learn more about upcoming CLF events. If you're not already on our distribution list, please get on the webpage and sign up. So now, with no pressure on our speaker, I'm going to start introducing him. Ricardo Salvador is a wonderful human being whom I've enjoyed getting to know over the last 4 or 5 years. Ricardo grew up in southern Mexico in Oaxaca. His mother was a German-American missionary from a California farming family, and his father a Zapotec Indian. So Ricardo grew up in a household where English, Spanish, and Zapotec were spoken. So he's at least trilingual. Actually, you're quadrilingual because you also speak food systemese very well. Ricardo went to high school in El Paso, Texas, and then he went to New Mexico State to become an agronomist. And we were just sharing this morning similar stories. His father was a preacher, my father was a preacher. Ricardo's father offered him 3 options. I only had 2. But his 3 were he could become a lawyer and go back to southern Mexico and help adjudicate land dispute issues and work for social justice. He could become a doctor. That was one of the 2 options I had available. And he could go back and he could work to provide medical care and public health services to his father's family and people. Or he could become an agronomist and return and work on corn, which is such an important cultural, cohesive symbol of southern Mexican culture, and obviously a hugely important source of sustenance. So he embarked at a very young age on becoming an agronomist, and after finishing his bachelor's degree at New Mexico State, he went to Iowa State, where he received his master's and his PhD in agronomy. And Ricardo also shared with me that he and his wife lived in Iowa for 28 of their adult, well, actually not just the adult years, all of your years. So he is a real Midwesterner who first was transplanted to Battle Creek, Michigan, where he led the Kellogg program on food and health, and then more recently has become the head of the new program at the Union of Concerned Scientists on food and health. Throughout his career, Ricardo has done a number of groundbreaking things. He was the first person to teach a course in sustainable agriculture in the heart of the beast at a land-grant university, Iowa State University. That course was begun in 1989 and then was made available via the internet to land-grant students around the country. He also developed the first graduate program in sustainable agriculture in 2000 and served as its director until he left for the Kellogg Foundation. So Ricardo's work at the Union of Concerned Scientists couldn't be more fitting for our concerns about the environment and specifically our concerns about the way in which the food system and the environment and the health of the public are intertwined. I was tempted to put up the conceptual framework for the Center for a Livable Future because Ricardo is the living embodiment of that conceptual framework, but I thought that that would probably create another challenge for AV that we didn't need today. So, Ricardo, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Bob. This is a real privilege to be here with you. It's sort of like taking colds to Newcastle for me to come and speak about public health and food here because you folks run the preeminent program in that area here. And if I had questions on this topic, this is where I would come and speak with you folks here. But it's good to be with you. I'll add just one thing to what Rob has mentioned, and that is that when I joined the Union of Concerned Scientists, it was very clear to me that what we needed to do was to connect our traditional issues in food to public health, that this would be the most resonant way to achieve food system reform. And we had no expertise in that arena. And so knowing of Rob's work in the Center for a Livable Future and many of the staff on that program, being so close to DC, we came up here, you know, hat out, begging for some collaboration. And it has been a very productive relationship already resulting in 2 publications between the 2 organizations. So it's a real privilege to make this another manifestation of a partnership with an excellent program that you have here. So where I want to get at the very end here is a possibility ahead of us to galvanize this nation around a genuine food movement. And by authenticity in the food movement, I'm referring to political power that will bend this nation's food policies. So it is an audacious goal. One of the reasons why I think that this is necessary is I couldn't think of anything more American. As a matter of fact, I will make the argument when talking about the connections between agriculture, food, and public health, that really what's at stake here is nothing less than the American project, the possibility for all of us to fulfill the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness model that you're all familiar with. And probably in this room, that argument doesn't require a whole lot of elaboration, but I am going to go extensively into many of the reasons why our food system, first of all, needs reform, and then why it is that it has come to be the way that it is at present. Because unless we have a real good map of that, then ideas about how to proceed with the reform may not actually be viable. So let me get on with that. So as I've mentioned, I think that this is work that is really at the core of what this nation is about. So everything that you think of when you think about the ideal of your nation has to do with such ideas such as, for instance, democracy and freedom and the ability to fulfill one's personal potential. And food is at the core of all of that. If you think of any of the issues that are in the headlines today, literally in the headlines today are agreements around the nation's budget. And the cost to this nation of its food system is enormous, a significant proportion, probably approaching at least a quarter of the nation's budget. So this is one headline. Other headlines that you see have to do with climate change or with wage inequality or with chronic disease, to be really pointed about the business of this institution. And food is at the center of all of these issues. Most recently, just a few weeks ago, it was immigration. And the food system comes to a halt, complete halt, nothing works, not without tractors, not without chemicals, but without labor. If labor is not in the mix, then none of us are eating. And so, for all of those reasons, for all those interconnected reasons, we need to talk about what is behind the food system that most people actually don't perceive, that actually makes the food system invisible. So that when you talk about the need to reform the food system, unless we're talking to specialists such as you, then this is something that doesn't have a whole lot of resonance. So behind the food system is success, tremendous success. It has not always been the case that you could have whatever it is that you were hungry for whenever you wanted it. So this is a manifestation of great political and economic power. So as you sit here, you're some of the most powerful people on the planet, whether you feel that way or not. And one of the ways in which this is true is that if you have not eaten your lunch yet, and by the time, probably before I get done here, your mind will start turning in that direction, your thoughts about food will be these kinds of thoughts. Oh, what am I in the mood for? Is it Chinese? Is it Italian? Is it Mexican? Do I want some seafood? And then you'll put into the mix, well, how much time do I have? And you might put into the mix, if you don't have your credit card with you, how much spare change you have in your pocket. But once you put that mix in there, then you can have whatever it is that comes to your mind. So this is a powerful thing. So there are two ways in which you can satisfy that requirement. So one way is that you can go someplace where everything is taken care of, and you just essentially express your wish. It's as good as conjuring up what you want through magic, no matter where in the world it is produced. Or the other way that you can do this is actually once in a while, maybe about once a week for most of us, go someplace where essentially the building blocks to assemble our meals are available. 30 to 60,000 of those building blocks are available. You will deign to spend no more than about 10 to 20 minutes maximum building that meal at home. You do that for about half of your meals. But through either of these two channels, what you're able to do is to command the resources of the planet to flow to you. And this is a very literal thing. It is not a metaphor. So whatever it is that you want, whether it's native to this place, whether it's in season or not, you can not only have that, you can have varieties of that, which means that all of that embodied material, energy, nutrients, water, are flowing to you just in case you may want them. And there's a great deal of waste built into such a system because, of course, you will not be able to consume everything that is coming your direction and converging upon you in the event that you might choose it. But that is a luxury that your political and economic power derives from around the planet. So this is the system that we have, and because we perceive it as a success, because we just see the benefits of it, we don't think that there's anything to reform here. In fact, we think this is what everyone else should aspire to, and we should export it elsewhere. That is a symbol of having been successful in establishing a food system. Well, let's take some measures of this food system. Many of you are familiar with the organization Oxfam, which almost a year ago, in January of this year, put out this nice analysis which they titled Good Enough to Eat. Now, the premise of this analysis was to ask what the quality of the food system was in different nations around the world. And so they broke down the attributes of the food system that they were going to measure. You will see them across the top of this screen here. There's first of all sufficiency, then there's affordability, then there's the quality of the food, and then lastly the public health effects as symbolized through the incidence of diabetes and obesity. And so you can pretty much predict where the United States is, where good is over on the left-hand side of your screen. Color codes are for the different parts of the world, purple, North America. As everybody in this room would predict, the overall score for the U.S. food system is about as good as it can get. There's only 3 countries that they found that would be better than that, and they're wealthy countries in Northern Europe. And then when you ask the question, is there sufficiency? Well, the United States is in the block of countries where you don't worry about the sufficiency of the food for those for whom the system works. Of 307 million of us in this country, it works for almost all of us, but for about 50 million of us. So for the majority of us, we think there's plenty of food. Then there's the issue of affordability, which is a very key word to understand. This is not a synonym of cheapness. The food is not cheap. You just do the computation. If you accept the statistics that 10% of our average family income of $50,000 a year is what we expend for food, then $5,000 is what we expend for food, which is a huge amount of food to expend anywhere in the world except in the United States, Europe, and Australia. So just because the food system is global and it's supplying, that's what it means, that it's supplying everybody in exactly the same way through the same value chains. If you want to participate in full measure of the benefits available in the system as I've described it, and you live in Ghana, that food system does not work for you. You need $5,000 in order to be able to participate in it. So this is a very important concept. Affordability is a ratio. It's two numbers. It's the cost of the food, and then in the denominator is how much you earn. And because in the United States we're among the wealthiest in the world, then the quotient is small, which is, according to Daniel Kahneman, one of the best examples of thinking fast to assume from that it is cheap. So the difference between affordability and cost is important, and I remark on it, hop up and down on it several times so that we're not perpetuating a stereotype about the cost of food in the United States. So this number means we're very rich. So because we're very rich, then the affordability of the food is high in the United States. Let's go to the other characteristic. Just as you would express or expect, the food quality in the United States is very good. This means that even though you are all aware that every now and then there will be difficulties, there will be an infection originating in a field in Colorado or in California or in a plant in Georgia that will rapidly propagate throughout the entire system, it is usually contained within a period of about days to a week, even though, of course, the health consequences may not be so easily containable. But these are the exceptions. The majority of the time, you can have the confidence that when you sit and order your salmon at the restaurant, that you'll be able to enjoy that salmon and digest it, and there will be no consequences due to infectious disease, at least borne by that food. The last characteristic is this indicator for the quality of the food system on health. And here, we could not be among worst company. So we're in the company of the most obese, most diabetic countries in the world: Fiji, Mexico, Kuwait. Now, because Oxfam is an advocacy organization, you might think, well, you can't really take information from such organizations very seriously. They may be sandbagging. There may be something that they're actually up to in terms of their advocacy. So you may want to compare that study to a similar study published just 2 weeks later, done independently by the National Academies, with the title that you see here. The subtitle is probably the most revealing, so Shorter Lives, Poorer Health, in which you will find, if you look this up, that the United States ranks 17th among the globe's wealthiest countries in terms of the quality of its food for public health purposes. And the oddness of that number 17 is that that's how far down the list of the nations or the globe's wealthy countries you need to go to get to the United States. And so I don't know how many of you know of or follow the writings of the New York Times columnist Mark Bittman, but I can tell you that one of his many strengths is that he can listen to you speak for about 20 minutes, and then he'll say, oh, what you mean is, and give you a phrase that essentially summarizes the last 20 minutes of your lives. So when he took a look at these two studies in close succession, he wrote this column, Abundance Doesn't Mean Health. And to me, the punchline of this whole thing that reveals the truth about our food system is this one, which says, it's very hard to imagine having a food supply as abundant as ours and doing a worse job with it. So it's a very pithy summary of the situation that we've got. Now, a key thing to realize is that if this were a market result, then perhaps we might just, throw up our arms and say, well, this is a case of market failure. But this is not a case of what the market has produced without any external intervention. And so what I would like to do is to, first of all, enumerate the data that you're quite familiar with in terms of the measures that we can grab. And so these are clearly underestimates. But in terms of the measures that you're all familiar with, CDC tells us that the annual cost of diabetes is this. The latest figure to try to capture the cost of obesity is this. And here's a nice figure for the cost of the number one killer of Americans, heavily influenced by the way in which we eat, and it's $444 billion. The sums that are involved here are significant in terms of care, not to mention some run-on costs that we can take a look at here.
We've all heard that an apple a day keeps the doctor away. But what if I told you that same apple could save hundreds of thousands of lives and billions of dollars every year? You see, 725,000 Americans die each year of coronary heart disease, heart failure, and stroke. This costs American families and taxpayers $94 billion in medical costs treating those diseases. But what can our humble apple do about this? The latest scientific research shows that if Americans ate just one more serving of fruit or vegetables a day, we would prevent 30,000 premature deaths each and every year, just from heart diseases and strokes. And we'd save $5 billion in national medical costs related to those diseases. That's enough to buy a year's worth of groceries for 1.8 million Americans. Now let's back this up for a moment and see what happens if the apple called in some friends and Americans started eating enough fruits and vegetables to meet the federal government's dietary recommendations. We could prevent 127,000 deaths each year. That's about the population of a city like Topeka, Kansas, which would save a whopping $17 billion annually in national medical costs related to stroke and heart disease. In fact, economists say that people living their full lives, enjoying their families in full health, is worth an astounding $11 trillion. Our apple doesn't seem so humble anymore. But here's the problem. Current U.S. food policy stacks the deck in favor of junk foods while making healthy foods like fruits and vegetables more expensive. The U.S. government spends billions of dollars subsidizing farmers who grow corn and soybeans, which are used to make unhealthy processed foods. At the same time, government policies put up roadblocks that make it harder for farmers who want to grow the fruits and vegetables we need. In the end, taxpayers wind up paying twice for our unhealthy food system, once to subsidize junk food and again to treat diet-related diseases like heart disease and stroke. It's no wonder that both fiscal conservatives and health professionals are up in arms. Even as the U.S. government is encouraging us to eat the right stuff, they're subsidizing the wrong stuff, and it's killing us. How can you help? As individuals, we can and should try to choose healthier foods, but there's more we can do. Contact your congressional representatives and urge them to favor investments in healthy food, instead of subsidizing unhealthy processed foods that are making us sick. Team up with the Union of Concerned Scientists at ucsusa.org/healthyfood. Your heart and wallet will thank you for it.
Projects that we've done jointly with CLF. So with respect to the case that this is a situation that is not the product of the market, consider just the following oddity about this food system, that if you are aware of the fact that the cost of food is most influenced by, first of all, the cost to market it to you, followed by the cost to preserve it and transport it, followed by the cost to package it, then this is a particularly odd feature of the system, that the food that is least marketed to you, that requires the least packaging and the least processing, fruits and vegetables, are the most expensive. So there's something wrong with the theory of value add and how you determine the costs of these things, and we've had a description here of what it is. It is that the food that is the most marketed to you, the most processed, transported from a greater distance, actually receives direct subsidies from us. And there's reasons, there's a history for that. There's not necessarily a nefarious intent, but let's talk about nefarious intents, because before we can talk about reforming the system, there is a deep truth about the food system that we all need to accept, and that is that it is skewed, even so that what I've just described to you is sufficiently undesirable. It is skewed in such a way that there are demographies that are more seriously impacted, and actually, let me be more pointed, there are actually ethnicities that are more seriously impacted by these features of the food system, specifically because accessibility to the benefits of this food system are translated through your economic power, your economic standing in the country. And what we're looking at here is a proxy for the economic standing and power of the ethnicities within our own population, which is just not an interesting feature. It is an endpoint of a history in this nation, directly tied to the way in which the food system works. So let me be really explicit about this. Economists will tell us that the way that we generate our wealth is that because we have access to factors of production. The main factors of production, the orthodox version of the factors of production, is you have access to land or labor or rent or some combination of those that allows you to express your entrepreneurship. So this is how you acquire your wealth, that tremendous wealth that I described that then enables you to spend less than 10% for your food. So the system does not work for you when you don't have access to land, labor, rent, and the ability to express your entrepreneurship. And so, you know, the Kahneman version of fast thinking as well. There are ethnicities that are just not as entrepreneurial. But as I say, there is an endpoint to history, and we'll come back and talk to this, you know, in a very rushed way. But here's one example of appropriating people's land, which turns out to be the most agriculturally productive parcel of land in the United States in a concerted, explicit military campaign lasting 50 years. So you can predict on the basis of this very simple analysis that if you wanted to find poor, hungry, immiserated people embedded in the United States, you would go to those places that we call native reservations, and you will find those people there. And that is true. That is the actuality. You would predict it, and that is the case. Likewise, in terms of appropriating labor, this is a military campaign, more than 200 concerted military campaigns to appropriate the land of these people. Likewise, here is a very important truth around the nature of the food system in the United States, that in a very explicit, concerted way, we kidnapped folks, transported them in such a way that we ripped them asunder from their families, their native places, exploited, brutalized them, enslaved them, and then even after we said that slavery was over, we have systematically excluded them from enjoying the benefits of the wealth that their labor helped to create. And this is not history. You just simply take a look at daily headlines, police brutality against specific demographics in the nation. You need to take a look at what's happening with rolling back Voting Rights Act process, and the history will be very explicit. Now, let's be very clear. What that slave labor was doing was building up the food system of the United States. And so these things are not incidental in terms of the endpoint of the history. And take a look at today's modern version of slavery. And to make a real explicit point of this, this is not to put anyone on the spot. It's because we can't be realistic about the food reform that's required unless we understand how we ended up at the food system that we have right now. So this is today's modern slavery, and this is not a metaphor. This is not taking license with a very serious concept. These are farm laborers, specifically with the coalition of Immokalee workers. So set aside that there's been actual slavery, people in chains in Immokalee in southern Florida, in very recent headlines. But just think about the following. If I were to say to you, these farm workers are as entitled as any one of us sitting here to the benefits of providing labor, which means safe working conditions, which means access to medical programs and benefits, a retirement program. In the majority of this nation, that would be a laughable proposition. What these folks earn per family right now is about $10,000 a year. So think about that, $10,000 a year, without which, going back to earlier remarks, none of us eat. If they're not there, we don't eat. Now, they're the least politically powerful in the entire nation. By design, this is the case. They have no leverage to bargain for any of the rights that we talked about. Slavery, not a metaphor. They have no choice. So I can expand on this if you're interested when we get to Q&A, because I know the question in the back of your mind, well, why are these folks here? And that is a very interesting question, which involves both push and pull. But because I want to keep my eye on the prize here, which is the features of the food system that need reform, this has to change. This cannot continue. So it's not incidental who's hungry. If you actually begin to do the inventory of who is hungry, who is on SNAP, who is actually food insecure in this nation, you're going to people that labor in the fields. You're going to people in the food chain. You're going to folks that actually are in the back of the house when you sit down and ask for your salmon. It's those people. So the folks that actually pick, process, deliver, clean up after us are the folks that we're talking about. So the food system itself depends on creating immiseration, hunger, and poverty. This is not a food system that any of us should be proud of. So it requires serious reform. Now, I mentioned that we'd come back to this. This is the beginning of the phenomenon that I talked about, land appropriation. Today's Congress wouldn't be so brave and transparent as this. You see that it's a very helpful name of the original act that we're talking about here, the Indian Removal Act. It tells you exactly what it's about, 1830. You're not guessing about that. I'm guessing today's Congress would probably call this something like the Indian New Opportunities and Employment Act. As you know, this wave began on the eastern seaboard, just a little bit south of where we are at the moment. This land was then made available through the Homestead Act in chunks of about 160 acres. You just needed to show that you were producing. And after about 5 years, you had the deed to this that was signed into law by Abraham Lincoln. I don't want to dwell on many of these examples here. I want to make the case as we sort of leaf through the various instances of federal legislation that has created the contours of today's food system, that the food system is not a result of the market operating on its own, that there has been direct investment in creating the characteristics of this system. And for instance, I'll just remark on one of these that I've just blithely stepped through because this is a semester worth or more of conversation. The very question of supporting our farmers, which is a very valid policy goal, has been manifested through several different experiments. So do you support them by limiting what they produce and then guaranteeing high market price? Or do you support them by incentivizing all-out production and then guaranteeing market? There have been court decisions to try to adjudicate these very important mechanisms of a free market, with the end result being that today, the average income of a farm family is about $82,000. Earlier, I quoted to you that for the nation as a whole, that average is $50,000. Now, agricultural policy in this nation's history has consisted of 3 key steps. One, providing abundant, affordable land through the mechanisms that I've described. The second, investing in the infrastructure and the research knowledge that's required to drive agricultural progress. And third, providing and incentivizing markets, both domestically and internationally. And on each one of those 3 criteria, this has been a runaway success of federal policy. And we could walk away from it and declare it a victory. But instead, all of those programs remain in place as if they were still necessary. And the world's largest food and meat processors require that government support as part of their business model in order to continue to succeed. That also needs to change. That requires serious reform because it's a form of malfeasance. We could use public resources in a better way rather than concentrating them for the benefit of a few. So this is not necessarily a case that you should interpret as being anti-corporate. We should also be very clear about this. It pains me to even point it out, but just so that you don't have any doubt in your mind about what I mean when I make this point, without the, quote, corporate food sector, there is no food system. It is the food system. The characteristics that I described to you, that get you the food from wherever it is, whatever it is that you want, as many varieties of apples as you want. It is the complex logistical system that we learned to put in place from the moment that we needed to field armies across the planet and devise things as K-rations that essentially were the beginning of the system that we're all enjoying at the moment. But notice the close interactions between banking and the food system and the consolidation within the food system. So capital is going to do what capital is going to do. If Adam Smith himself were standing before you right here, he would say, and the balance against this rapacious behavior that we want to encourage, because then through competitiveness we come up with the most efficient ways of providing what the market demands. He would say the balance to that then is that there needs to be an additional power over the private sector that balances the excesses. That is the theory on which the nation was established. And so you know that one of the reasons why I claimed at the outset that the food system rap is about whether the proposition of this country itself is actually possible or not has to do with this, because the crisis of our times is whether democracy is an authentic idea that is going to survive. And it is expressed through the food system as powerfully as in any other aspect or dimension of this society. So the problem is that this body, this is symbolic, but this body and set of people who are supposed to be providing the balance against the excesses of the economic system, essentially now represent the interests of that system and not the interests of the people whom they are supposedly elected to guard. And so I want to remind you of the fact that this was a dynamic that was actually present at the very foundation of the country. Thomas Jefferson, who articulated these words, would be very disappointed to learn that not only were we not able to forestall the possibility that he worried about, but that it has actually come to the extreme that corporate power is greater than governmental power. All of this is core to the food system. So let's take an example here of something that I think may be in the back of the mind of folks that are champions of the way that the food system is developed, and it may be in the back of the mind of some of you. Perhaps you're thinking, well, you know, nobody's forcing me to eat any particular thing. As far as I know, I really have complete free choice. So I don't know what people like you are talking about when you go on this way, and you know, what burr you're actually sitting on. This is a plot of the McDonald's in the United States. It's the distance to a McDonald's from wherever we happen to be. So the closest one to us here, now this is a dangerous claim because there are college students in here and you're experts in this subject, but closest that I could figure out from Google Maps is up on Broadway here, about 1.5 miles north of us here. So we're never very far from one of these places here. And what I would like to do here is to just go through a common experience for all of us in order to actually live through the results of this food system as the majority of us would experience them, and then see whether we agree on the experience. So let's go to McDonald's. You have complete free choice about what you're going to eat in this nation. No one is forcing you to do one thing over the other when it comes to your food system. But here's one of the reasons why we're at McDonald's. It turns out that a lot of times in the food system, what we have is actually a shell game. When you're trying to reform a feature of the system, you lose sight of the causal factors. Turns out, as I've described to you already, but now I'll be really implicit, what the food system really sells us is time. It saves us time. It gives us convenience. The food is incidental. That's part of the business model, but the thing that we're buying from the food system is that we don't have to worry about taking the extra 15, 20 minutes in the morning or the extra half hour or hour in the evening for our meals. We can just pop in and out or assemble rapidly what we're going to eat. This is a tremendous value. Nobody's getting away with anything. When you see all these pie charts that show you the proportion of money that's going to farmers that are producing the raw commodity on which the edible bites depend, that's the share of the value that they're adding. The lion's share of the value is essentially getting those edible bites to you. So if you go outside of these doors, there'll be vending machines at not very many steps, and that's where the majority of the value is. So you end at a place like this because you're trying to save time. So maybe after you're done here, you're doing something like this. Oh, let's see, I've got 25 minutes to get there. With traffic, it's going to take me half that time. I really need to just be able to dash in someplace or not. McDonald's is on the way, so there you are. So you walk into McDonald's, and you're all experts at parsing the choices that you have. You can just call them out by a number. And let me focus on number 4 here. You folks can focus on whichever one you want, but let me tell you why I'm focusing on number 4. So notice that this is 2 cheeseburgers. Number 4 is 2 cheeseburgers. And the interesting thing about that is that if I, instead of paying $318 for these 2 cheeseburgers, upgrade to their meal, then I can get the large fries and any size of drink that I want for $5.29. So, and now let's say you all are very conscientious students or faculty of the Bloomberg School of Public Health. So you're in here because you're trying to save time, but you say, I don't know about cheeseburgers. Let's go over and take a look at the salads. So we're trying to eat healthfully in McDonald's, and you take a look at the salads, and you say, because you're being guided by the best medical knowledge that you're carrying around in your head, well, let's go for something like that Southwest salad. Oh, wait a minute, I see a Caesar there. That actually looks like, at 190 calories, grilled meat on it, that's actually the least damage I'm going to do. And I can skip the salad dressing. So that's going to cost me $4.69. It would cost me $5.09 if I went with a Southwest salad, but I'm going to pay $4.69 for that salad. And, you know, fruits and walnuts are good for me. Let's say I want to add the fruits and walnuts to my salad. This does not include fries. This does not include a drink. So now let's go back to number 4, because now I'm not so certain. Because for that $5.09 for the salad with no drink and no fries, compared to $5.29 for the full meal. And remember, I'm not just standing there making an analytical decision. I'm hungry. I'm trying to save time. I'm aggravated that I'm in line. And it smells wonderfully. You know, just remember what it smells like when you walk into the McDonald's. You know, the salad is not making you salivate. The nice charred meat is making you salivate. So everything is pulling you over in that direction. This is not incidental. You begin to fall under that influence outside of the McDonald's. So, and so that you don't change your mind, you know, the moment that you slap that order down, within a minute, they're specialized to get you that number 4, within a minute. Now, the salad, it's, you know, McDonald's itself would not claim this is the place that you go to get your best salads. And so you're comparing your warm, aromatic cheeseburger, you know, that will just go so smoothly onto the palate against this salad, which is chilled, you know, to preserve it, which is the majority iceberg lettuce. You know, they may have a little bit of the mesclun up on top to make it look good, but this is chilled, limp salad that will be flavorless when you put it on your palate. I mean, there's just no comparison. And then take a look at the cost. And you're trying to behave as well as you can. You know, you teach at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, for crying out loud. So, you know, you're looking at these choices, and let's say that you're very disciplined about this, and you say, okay, let's go over here and take a look at the choices to drink. Got to wash it down. So take a look at the soft drink scale. $1.49, you get the small. For 20 cents more, you get the medium. For 20 cents more, you can get a tub of soft drink. And, you know, nobody walks into McDonald's and asks for the small. It's un-American. The prices are structured so that you feel stupid trying to do the healthy thing. So, you know, I'm going to go for the water. You know, I know that the orange juice is fall health, and so I'm going to go for the water. So this is what it all totes up to. I can get that super meal for $5.29, and I can get the healthy meal for $8.47. Now, in case you think I'm sandbagging you, you know, go do this exercise yourself. But if you just reduce it to the limp Caesar salad, chilled, water, you're still going to be paying more for the healthful meal at McDonald's than you would for the unhealthful cheeseburger. So I'm clearly being steered in a particular direction about 5 different ways. So there's your free choice in the food system for just one simple quotidian, you know, boring example. We're subject to many more influences, such as this one. And why is the food system able to do this? Actually, McDonald's knows that they have a serious problem. Their own in-house polling, because they are losing market share in the food system to places like Chipotle's and Panera and so on. And so when they do their in-house polling, what they're learning is that you don't feel good when you go into McDonald's. An astounding 67% of people that walk into McDonald's say they don't feel good. And when McDonald's pollers anonymously ask them why that is, they say, well, I know that this is not quality food, and they use the word fresh. So it's not quality, it's not fresh. So we know, you know, what we're getting when we go into this place, but we're buying convenience. So thereby hangs another semester of speculation on business models that are available to us. But, you know, the point having been made here, let's just take a look at the fact that actually the population is beginning to shift a little bit, and that McDonald's is beginning to feel it, and they've got a serious problem, this whole sector, not just McDonald's, but, you know, they're emblematic of that sector, because we're gradually beginning to get what we're doing to ourselves when we walk into that place. It's not any cheaper to go into a Panera or a Chipotle. We're making different choices. So there's some progress there. Now, why is McDonald's able to give us that luscious cheeseburger at a better price than they can give us the salad? And so this is, again, where the non-market aspects of the food system come into play. You are the experts in this. I'm not going to elaborate on this other than to maybe make the comment that this is what the nation's dietary guidelines look like, the science developed by the Institute of Medicine and collaborators. This is what it looks like after it goes through the sieve of politics. Because, you know, if it were just you making these recommendations, you would have water up there instead of dairy. You would actually say lean meat instead of protein. But this is not politically acceptable because the stakeholders in this industry are the commodity groups that must be able to pronounce on what they're willing to accept. And so rather than naming lean meat, we have to have this protein category, and we have to make as if milk were a necessary nutrient. But still, the committee that put this together 5 years ago did rather well, because this is still a plant-based diet. 3/4 of this is a plant-based diet, whole grains, fruits and vegetables. Half of your daily eating should be fruits and vegetables. So this is pretty good. So this is what this nation recommends as dietary guidelines, and this is what this nation invests in terms of its agricultural programs. This is analysis done by the staff of Congresswoman Shelley Pingree. So as you can see, of the $5 billion that we expend annually in order to support the nation's agricultural system, primarily its commodity agricultural system, you'll see that about 61% of it goes to the production of corn and other grain, and about 19% of it goes into the production of oils. These are proxies for corn and soy, basically. And so these are the ingredients that go into the junk food diet, the standard American diet. So this is what we invest in. And what we invest in the production of what's on the left-hand side is less than 0.5%. So that it should be no surprise that the outcomes that I've described to you are the case. So if you are a Midwestern farmer, there's very little chance that you will fail. No matter what kind of failure there is, whether it's a market failure, whether it's a climate failure, we will cover you. And we cover this in a gold-plated way. We pay the insurance industry and then subsidize them 2/3 of their costs for delivering those programs in order to deliver that insurance to farmers. We utilize the power of the United States government, including its diplomatic corps, to guarantee markets for what we produce in the United States internationally. So it's a pretty nice gig. Now, that is something else that needs to change. This is the malfeasance that I was referring to earlier. We've done an analysis at UCS. We're not the only ones, but this is just our latest iteration on asking the obvious question: what if we did invest in accordance to the dietary guidelines? So public investment should be consonant with, coherent with, what the best public science is generating. And so if you ask, if we planted that plate, what would the structure of agriculture look like? Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to go to the punchline here and just basically summarize that with very little land in the Midwest, we can produce the domestically producible fruits and vegetables required to fulfill the nation's dietary guidelines. That caveat there was that obviously we're not going to be producing the bananas, the most popular fruit in the United States, or the pineapples and so on in the United States. But of that which we can produce in the United States, very little land in the Midwest can be used for that. By the way, the devil's bargain exemplified by that is that the reason for this is that California farmers agreed to live in the, quote, free market and not expect subsidies the way that commodity farmers do, in exchange for commodity farmers not getting into fruits and vegetables, increasing the supply, decreasing the price of fruits and vegetables. That's why California farmers support this particular system. And this is hardwired into the subsidy system to Midwestern farmers, because if you do want to plant something other than corn and beans, you lose what is referred to as the land base, the acreage on the basis of which you qualify for government subsidies. And even though there are sort of nibbling on the edges reforms to this, they're actually being held back by insurance considerations. So there's still major obstacles toward us being able to produce what the government recommends that we eat domestically. So, but suppose that we did that. Our economists did the following analysis. This is a winners and losers analysis, which means that if you take into account that if we didn't need to produce as much meat, therefore produce as much grain, there would be people who would not have employment. But then if we produce more fruits and vegetables and needed more farmers markets and the infrastructure to preserve and to deliver that, then it turns out that the healthful model of the food system, first of all, has a lower ecological footprint. You require very little land to produce fruits and vegetables compared to commodity grain and meat. And you would generate a net of 189,000 jobs that we don't have right now, and a net of $9.5 billion of economic impact that we're not experiencing right now. So if we did the right thing in food, we would get lots of other things right. There would be much more opportunity for employment and economic development. So this does not come free. our economists did calculate what it would take to set up the new programs to do the research for food and vegetable production, to support the distribution of more fruits and vegetables through local and regional supply networks, through farmers markets, and so on. And the cost that they estimated would be 90 million, as against 5 billion that we currently expend annually in order to support the unhealthful food system. So here's an example of malfeasance, if there ever is one. In terms of public dollars, if we were just talking about the market, there's no argument to be made here. But this is the way that we've influenced the food system, with public dollars. So let's talk about what can be done. So we first of all need to specify what we want. At the Union of Concerned Scientists, I've brought along this concept that we developed at the Kellogg Foundation of Good Food. It embodies 4 attributes simultaneously. I'm sorry to have to specify this, but an aspect of good food is that it is nourishing, it's healthy, it doesn't contaminate you. And so you thrive when you consume this over the course of your lifetime. You don't find that when you eat 3 times a day when you get hungry and you eat what the food system provides for you, then in middle life you are obese or hypertense or diabetic. Good food is healthy. And so it's a damning commentary on the state of our food system that I should have to specify that. But that's attribute number 1. Attribute number 2 is that we should not exploit nature to do this. You're quite familiar with that magnanimous desire, often expressed more or less as a ditty, a slogan, that we must feed the 9 billion from establishment agriculture. And one of the most important things that we can do to feed the 9 billion is to reduce our ecological footprint, liberating land, labor, water, energy, nutrients that could be used elsewhere and at another time in the future in order to provide a secure food supply. So not exploiting nature is an important characteristic of good food. Likewise, not exploiting people is an essential characteristic. And lastly, you can actually walk into a Whole Foods and get healthy, green, and fair, but you can't get affordable. Or you can walk into a Walmart right now and you can get healthy if you know where to look for it. They have their own imprint of organic now. And if it's organic, then it's an approximation or a proxy for green. And you can get affordable. That's the whole business model of Walmart. But the other side of that business model is that it's not fair, because Walmart's business model is actually to specify the end price and squeeze the supply chain to provide that cost to them. So it's creating immiseration and exploitation down the supply chain. So those are not examples of good food. Good food simultaneously would embody healthy, green, fair, and affordable. This is not an impossible thing for us to deliver, but just about everything about the food system must change, per the summary that we just went through. So, is this actually feasible? So if you actually had this task, the way that you would begin is to take that first step, and you would take the next step. And everybody that's run a marathon knows you can get to the end, one step at a time. So that's the proposition here. So rather than wringing our hands about the audacity or the impossibility of the chore, it is the most American thing that I can think of to essentially roll up our sleeves and get at it, especially because it is a challenging thing. If we believe in those principles that I've just described, the democratic principle, the equality of all human beings, the ability for all of us to pursue life, liberty, and happiness, then these are the things that we must fight for in the food system, because the food system as it presently exists is an example of exploitation. So, let's talk about 5 things that need to happen. These are taken by from a brand new textbook, actually the latest edition of Stephen Gleasman's textbook, Agroecology, which sometime this month should be released, if not already. Characteristic number 1 that Gleasman has identified, I'll have to run through these really quickly. And am I out of time here? Am I 4 minutes from the end? Okay, so this is what I wanted to verify. So I will go through here very quickly. Obviously, production needs to improve so we're not exploiting nature. One of the ways of doing this is actually to substitute resources where we have toxic chemicals for organic inputs, an improvement. You can still be unsustainable when you're organic. The next stage is actually to integrate ecological mechanisms to supplant external inputs to the extent that this is possible. The next step would be to connect actual demand to the production on a local and regional level, not in totality. This is not an argument to replace one style of food system for another, but in the sense that we can actually get feedback loops going in terms of the things that we actually want. And then lastly, Gleesman recommends that we actually make a movement out of this. We need to impact the policies that I've just described. And in answer to that, one of the things that I've recently been able to participate in is a call for a coherent national policy for food, health, and well-being. Do a Google search for a Washington Post column authored by Mark Bittman, Michael Pollan, yours truly, and Olivier de Schutter, where we make the case that this is not an appeal for new things. It's actually an appeal for the government to do less, but better. It would be more cost efficient to just essentially coordinate the things that the government already does and eliminate things that work across purposes. So this is the argument that we're making. We can't compete on the basis of money. We actually do need an honest-to-goodness movement. And what this is going to take is ingredients that are readily available out there. Now, due to the shortness of time here, you will have to interpolate some of this. But think about the structure of the food movement right now. There are farmers out there that advocate for sustainable agriculture. You could go to these folks and say, what are the barriers for you to be able to do the things that you want to do in the way that you want them to do? Or what incentives would you like, or both? Write that up. And then go to farm labor and say exactly the same thing to them. Keep following the structure of the food system. Go to the food chain workers. Say exactly the same thing to them. Go to institutional purchasers. One proxy here is the school food system. Go to the health sector. Say exactly the same thing there. What should we be doing so that your job is better and you're not dealing with chronic disease? You're mostly seeing people that are healthy and are coming down with the diseases of old age and so on. So you do the same thing all the way throughout the entire structure, and you realize that what I'm describing is all of the stakeholders describing what is best for them. And of course, all of this needs to be looped up by the demand from the populace, from the community, for the sorts of things that they want to see in the food system, which I've enumerated in summary as we don't want it to exploit other people, we don't want it to exploit nature and deprive future generations or other people right now in other parts of the planet so that we can benefit. It should be healthful and it should be affordable to us. So this is the dream of what a food movement could unite around. And those of you that are realists, and particularly those of you that have had experience in the policy realm, realize the almost impossibility of uniting different groups even within one of those sectors, much less the audacity of dreaming that it could be done across all of these sectors. And this is not an appeal to set up a centrally defined and led and controlled movement. It's an appeal for coordination among all of these sectors on the rationale that if the entire food movement unites around the attributes of the food system that we want and that would be better for all of us, then we can get more accomplished working together than trying to do things on our own. For instance, the Union of Concerned Scientists doesn't have the power on its own to achieve this level of transformation. We really do need a movement-building, coalition-based, politically mobilized manifestation of political power and public will in order to undo the calamity of our food system. So I'm clearly out of time, and so let me just end with something. I haven't gotten all of a sudden self-absorbed here, but I do want to show you what I looked like when I came to the United States so that you perceive that I was fully baked. So let me leave you with this. It still happens to me, because I was 16 years of age at the time, that I'll still see things and say, oh, that's the way Americans are. You know, I still see things through a lens where I still see what this country is like in a way that you may not be able to see for yourselves. So here's the thing that I can tell you about Americans, and that is that you are never satisfied. Good is never good enough. And one of the best examples I can think of is I've seen friends remodel their kitchen, redo the porch on the front of the house, and before they can actually sit down and let the paint dry and rock in their chair and enjoy the products of their work, they're already saying, wrong paint. Or, you know, if I just redesigned this, there'd be an extra square foot in that closet. Next time, this is the way I'm going to do it. That's inherent to the American character. So that is the way of the food system. So it has been tremendously successful. It has provided abundant supply for some of us. It has licked productivity. It has licked scale. But it cannot continue to exploit people or nature. Good is not good enough. Reforming that is the most American thing that you can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. We have about 10 minutes for questions. If you would like to ask a question, raise your hand. We've got mics, and we have a question right over here.
I saw this movie, Cowspiracy, speaking to your point about feeding 9 billion. And in this documentary, Cowspiracy, they talk about how unsustainable animal agriculture is, and even to the point where organic animal agriculture is even less sustainable. A gentleman interviewed in the movie, Will Tuttle, who wrote the book, The World Peace Diet, said that if everyone, not that this would happen, but if everyone went vegan tomorrow, that we would actually be able to feed 12 to 15 billion people. And I just wanted to ask your thoughts about that. And thank you for your
Thank you. Well, I think you've summarized it really well, and I agree with all those premises. I could gild this a little just by saying that I would start at the opposite end. So let's not say that in order for this kind of a vision to be possible, we all need to commit to stop eating meat. And let's just allow that there is a proportion of meat that would meet dietary guidelines that would be helpful for us to consume. The fact is that at the moment we're so far out of balance with that is actually what needs reform. And the consequence is that the scale and the methods that are used to support large-scale concentrated livestock production, which is the most efficient way to do it, is what needs to be reformed. So if we actually consumed less meat, and particularly beef, which has the largest footprint of production, then a lot of these things would be taken care of. So you mentioned that it's unfeasible to expect that everyone would become vegan tomorrow. I like that optimism. So look up a paper by Ripple et al. From January of this year that essentially does a very nice analysis showing that the ecological cost, and of course the health cost of overconsumption of beef is so far out of proportion with every other source of meat. Even white meat, so pork produced in CAFOs, has a much smaller footprint than the footprint of beef production. So if we did nothing, I won't say eliminate beef production, but if we did nothing but just essentially dramatically reduce the consumption of beef, which would make sense for many other reasons, I'm at Bloomberg, so I'll say for health reasons, then many of these concerns would be taken care of. As a matter of fact, there's a dramatic graph in the Ripple article, he's at Washington State, that essentially compares a vegan diet, the carbon footprint of the vegan diet with the carbon footprint of fish, poultry, pork, and beef. And the first 4 of those are really close to each other. So pork production is much closer to the vegan diet in terms of the carbon footprint than beef is to any of those. It's completely off the scale. So if we're going to target anything, it's the overconsumption of beef.
Thank you so much for your talk. I had a question about the subsidy issue. You spoke a while about how subsidizing corn can affect what we're selling and growing in the United States. There's several articles out right now suggesting that it has little impact on the costs of food and thus what people buy and what's created. And that doesn't sound necessarily logical to me, and I wanted to hear what you had to say on that.
Yeah, that's a common argument. This may sound like it's far afield. If that were the case, there would be no opposition from the industry when we say, let's remove this subsidy. So there's got to be something to this. And here's the metaphor to understand it. And actually, you need time graphs in order to understand this. And I have a very nice one. I just unfortunately don't have it with me right now. But think of this metaphor. Let's suppose that you didn't know how a Roman arch was put together, and you just happened upon a Roman arch and were starting to admire it. For those of us that do know how this thing is put together, you first of all build some kind of a wooden structure, a support system upon which you begin to build your arch. And then as you get to the top of the arch and the bricks begin to lean in, they're supported by that until you put in a keystone at the very top of the arch. Then you can remove the wooden scaffolding. And then it looks like the whole thing just sprang up as it is. So the role of these subsidies is that they were the wooden scaffolding that got us to the Roman arch right now. And it is, forgive me, it is basically just opportunism that even though the business no longer needs that wooden scaffolding, they're acting as if they needed it. And it's an economic advantage to them, obviously. And it's not so much the dollar figures in direct payments. Actually, we won't get into the epicycles of the policy reforms that are in play right now. It's that essentially we've made a commitment. There is no way that this industry is going to fail. But we don't say it that way. We say we're supporting farmers. When in fact the beneficiaries of all of these subsidies are the people that manufacture the inputs and the folks that buy the artificially low-priced commodities out of the system. It is an iron triangle that's very difficult to break as long as farmers believe that their actual beneficiaries in those two other sectors actually have their interests at heart. The farmers are some of the most disempowered folks in here that don't really have a whole lot of choices in front of them. And again, another semester's worth of talk on that. But that's the reason for that.
We have a question over here.
Hi, thank you for an excellent presentation. Dan Barnett from Environmental Health Sciences. I had a couple of policy-related questions relating to the Affordable Care Act and its greater emphasis on preventive services. I was just interested in your thoughts in terms of how optimistic you are that this emphasis on preventive services will impact the market share in a favorable direction in terms of chipping away at the McDonald's and those kinds of fast food corporations. And related to that, what kind of role do you see healthcare institutions and public health systems in terms of leveraging the Affordable Care Act toward that end?
Yeah, you've essentially named one of the strategies that we're exploring and beginning to put into place. So the partnership that Rob and I have described is about this. As a matter of fact, we're about to release in January a co-authored fact sheet, which is essentially going to be a brief on how you could match resources that are provided by the Farm Bill for an innovative new program to directly subsidize the things that we want. This is a respectable policy mechanism. Subsidize the things that you want, tax the things that you want to discourage. So right now we're doing the reverse. So to get this right, we have an opportunity by taking the incentive to match subsidized fruits and vegetables at farmers markets for people of limited means and go to hospitals that need to find a replacement for the community benefits that up until now in states that have adopted the Affordable Care Act have been going to supplement the cost of health care. So with those liberated funds, there is a resource that can be matched to provide the match that's required to access pool number one. And it would all add up to preventive medicine in the sense that a more healthful diet then would impede the development of chronic disease. So I would say that this is at the stage of learning how to ride the tricycle, not even the bicycle, but it is an opportunity that's out there. And I think step number one is these kinds of linkages. We're not in separate businesses. It's different ends of the same thing, and we ought to work together. As a matter of fact, the Post article that I recommended to you essentially makes the case that one of the reasons why we have the deplorable state of affairs that I've described right now is that we're acting on different aspects of the food system as if they were not connected. We are sufficiently sophisticated to be able to deal with the connections and manage the system rather than the fragments of the system.
Very good talk. Thank you. Kellogg Schwab from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health here. My question, you used McDonald's as the example. And then you also mentioned a couple other kind of newer kids on the block, maybe innovators or disruptors or something like that. Do you see an opportunity, one, either for McDonald's to game change shift? I mean, there's more Subways now than McDonald's around the world, or is it going to be these kind of organic focused individual kind of corporations that try to push this in a way that could be an advantage for them to take on a new market share that could drive change. I'm trying to figure out a business approach to this besides just saying it's going to come from either a policy side, but really seeing what would be the opportunities to try to pull them in. It's probably not Walmart. You indicated Walmart is a squeeze factor, but are there other ones there that could be kind of encouraged to explore this?
Yeah, I think all of those are possibilities. All of those possibilities need to be pushed. So I mentioned earlier in quick passing, the thing that all of us want out of the food system is convenience. If in addition to convenience, there were a market for fairness, say, if there were a market for what I'm calling green here and so on, the market evidence is that we respond to that. We want to feel good about the stuff that we're buying. That's why a place like Chipotle, which is pushing sustainability as part of what you're buying when you go there, can charge the prices that they do. So definitely new players. By the way, Chipotle, as you know, was a subsidiary of McDonald's that they spun off because they didn't see any potential there. But the scenario, the last scenario that you described is in play right now. The current CEO of McDonald's evidently wants to hang on to the old model. He's really fighting hard to get the world shoehorned into his business model, whereas the theory of capitalism is that you actually develop the business model to fit the world that's in front of you, and those are the winners. And if I were talking to the CEO of McDonald's, if you were he, I would say is take a look at another business sector. Pull out your cell phone and stare at the thing and ask yourself, how long has that thing existed? Before 2007, it did not exist. The dominant market players had names like this: Research in Motion, Nokia, Palm. No one would have dreamed in January of 2007 that anybody could come across and demolish them. And not only did that not happen, it happened in half a year. The moment that the iPhone was announced, the entire industry went that way. And the industries that decided that the future was in that model of a smartphone are the ones that are now the dominants in the industry, that were not even on the map in the mobile cell business sector at that time. So even though it may seem impossible to talk about the giants, Cargill, McDonald's, and all of these folks, and say they just have such dominance that will never change, an idea like this idea that, look, I don't need to feel bad about walking into the place where I eat. I don't want to subsidize slavery. There are restaurant chains out there that actually have an agreement with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, the Fair Trade Agreement, that essentially guarantees you're not supporting slavery. So if I can walk into a place and buy those sorts of things, the market evidence is that Americans will actually pay for that. So I think every one of the scenarios that you described is possible. We all need to be pushing on them. We have peers in the green groups, the environmental advocacies, that really do believe strongly in transforming the existing food system. So they work with Walmart, with Pepsi, and so on. So all the more power to them. That needs to be done by someone. We push the buttons of policy, and as you've heard, we really want to work with other organizations to mobilize this nation, to scandalize this nation about what we're supporting and the fact that we can do better, that it doesn't have to be this way. And it's not one approach or the other. I think that they're complementary.
Hi, my name is Rachel Tucker. I had a question kind of following up to the last one about greenwashing. So we've seen, massive consolidation of organic companies, organic practices by big corporations, by big food interests. As consumers, besides sort of trying to move away from some of our purchase and sort of patronage of more processed foods, even ones that are deemed natural, organic, healthy, how can we sort of cut through some of that?
Yeah. Well, so my template is that very simple formula. It may be mistaken for a simplistic formula, but asking those 4 questions. I don't have a magic wand, but look at something or look at a business model and say, will this support healthy, green, fair, and affordable? Simultaneously, not any subset of those. And I gave you an example of how Walmart comes tumbling down even though they meet 3 of those characteristics. Whole Foods comes tumbling down even though they meet 3 of those characteristics. And this was not theoretical. We came up with this concept at the Kellogg Foundation when we asked, what food system are we supporting? How can we track it, quantify it, make sure that we're making progress over time? And when people would come to us and say, we've got this great deal, Walmart is going to buy all of our peaches, can we get a grant from you to develop our business? And the answer was no, and it was not arbitrary. It's because we asked that question. So I would recommend some sieve like that. That's the one that works for me.
Well, part of this is a small token of our appreciation. It is green, it's fair, it's affordable, and it's healthy.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
It's actually a photograph of skillfully done by Mike Milley, our CLF colleague, who took what is available at our CSA on any given Tuesday afternoon during the CSA season. And if we could get everybody to eat what's on that photograph, we'd all be healthier.
I'm all for it. Great work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.